Have you ever noticed how immigration debates can turn a family brari into a full-on political summit in under 5 minutes? One person says, "We need stricter borders," another says, "People are just looking for a better life," and suddenly Uncle Sifo is pointing at the TV like he's addressing the United Nations. Well, South Africa recently got another one of those moments after a South African man shared his experience with Zimbabwean law enforcement during an interview with the SABC. And let me tell you, what he said sparked serious conversations online. But here's the thing, this topic is complicated, it's emotional, it's political, it's historical. And if we're being honest, it's also deeply personal for many people across Southern Africa. So today, we're breaking it down carefully, respectfully, and honestly. Not to attack anyone, not to spread hate, but to understand the advantages and disadvantages of the points he raised. Because whether you agree with him or not, one thing is certain, this conversation is not going away anytime soon. But before we break it down, let's listen to what he had to say.
With us. I'm advocate Ngosinathi Malkas, a human rights lawyer. I'm from exile, a former member of Mkondo Wesizwe. I spent my youth in the liberation struggle in this country. In the 90s, I was detained and I was arrested and detained in Zimbabwe, Harare, in a notorious prison called Chikurubi Maximum Prison. The reason why I was detained in Zimbabwe at that time was precisely because I was in Zimbabwe illegally. And secondly, I had the MK guerrilla background, military background, when I skipped the country. I was the danger to national security in Zimbabwe. But during that period, I was very angry that I am the liberation political activist, a freedom fighter. Here am I in Chikurubi Maximum Prison. I'm prisoned here. And this is the country that is said to be liberated. But frankly, post-apartheid South Africa, when I served the national intelligence of this country, South Africa, at a senior level, it was then that I began to understand the importance and significance of national security in any country world over. It was then that I understood the integrity, the need for the protection of the integrity of sovereignty in any country world over. So I'm saying what the plethora of marches that took place in the past few days were nothing else other than saying to government that have been in power for more than 33 years now that we've got a problem of the undocumented illegal foreigners. And this must not be convoluted and skew documented people who are in the country legally and the people who are in the country illegally. So those marches that took place were directed at the undocumented foreigners that are in the country. So it is a reflection of what the minister has summarized, dismal failure of government, in particular the Department of Home Affairs, for the mere fact that we've got a manifestation of undocumented illegal immigrants in the country is the failure in 30 years of democracy. Right. The mere fact that we've got undocumented illegal foreigners in the country use the cheap labor is a reflection of the Department of Labor. More importantly, as the minister has indicated that recently the deportation has accumulated to 40%. What does that tell you? It tells you that there is a lack, there's been a lack of the South African government to elevate the issue of regional integrated economy and immigration at a level of SADC and the African Union.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment and share. Now let's get back to the video. Now, the man in the interview explained that he had once been detained in Zimbabwe during the 1990s. According to his account, he was arrested partly because he was in the country illegally and also because authorities viewed his military background as a national security concern. He described spending time in a notorious prison in Harare and said that at the time he felt angry because he considered himself part of the liberation struggle in southern Africa. But years later, after working in South Africa's intelligence structures, he said his perspective changed. He explained that he eventually came to understand why countries prioritize national security and sovereignty. In simple terms, he was basically saying, I used to be angry about being detained, but later I understood why governments protect their borders. Now immediately, people online split into different camps faster than South Africans split over whether pineapple belongs on pizza. One group said, finally, somebody is speaking honestly about border control and illegal immigration. Another group said, hold on. Immigration is more complex than just blaming foreigners. And honestly? Both sides have points worth discussing. Let's start with the advantages of what he said. One major point he raised was national sovereignty. Every country in the world has borders. Every country has immigration laws. Whether you're talking about South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, the UK, Canada, or Japan, governments regulate who enters and who stays. That's not unique to Africa. It's literally how modern states operate. And many South Africans feel frustrated because they believe the immigration system is poorly managed. Some communities complain about overcrowded public services, pressure on clinics, unemployment, housing shortages, and undocumented migration. So when someone publicly says government departments have failed to properly manage immigration, many people immediately relate to that frustration. Another advantage of his argument is that he emphasized documentation. This is important because there's a difference between documented immigrants and undocumented immigrants. A documented immigrant follows legal processes. They may have visas, work permits, refugee status, or residence permits. An undocumented immigrant does not have valid legal authorization. That distinction matters because public discussions often become too emotional and too general. Sometimes all foreigners get blamed for problems caused by a smaller group of people involved in illegal activities. That's unfair and dangerous. So when someone specifically separates legal migrants from undocumented migrants, some people see that as a more balanced approach. He also criticized government institutions, especially around labor and immigration management. And to be fair, this criticism isn't new. South Africans across the political spectrum have raised concerns about corruption, weak enforcement, administrative delays, and poor coordination between departments. Let's be honest. If you've ever been to Home Affairs, you already know patience becomes your full-time job. You walk in at 7 a.m. and somehow leave emotionally older than when you arrived. But jokes aside, efficient immigration systems are important. Without proper systems, confusion grows. Tensions increase. Rumors spread. And eventually ordinary people begin blaming each other instead of demanding better governance. Another point he raised was regional migration and economic integration within SABC and the African Union. Now this is where the conversation gets very interesting. Southern Africa has always had movement across borders. Miners, traders, students, workers, refugees, families, people have moved across the region for decades. Economies are connected. Histories are connected. Liberation struggles were connected too. During apartheid, many South African activists found support in neighboring countries. So regional migration isn't some brand new phenomenon that started yesterday. What the speaker seemed to suggest is that governments have not fully developed strong regional systems to manage migration and economic opportunities together. In theory, better regional cooperation could reduce illegal migration by creating more legal pathways for work, trade, and movement. Now let's talk about the disadvantages and criticisms of his position, because there are several important ones. One major criticism is that discussions about undocumented immigration can sometimes fuel xenophobia if people are not careful. South Africa has experienced outbreaks of anti-foreigner violence in the past. Shops have been attacked. People have been displaced. Communities have become divided. So whenever immigration debates happen publicly, there's always a risk that some individuals may use legitimate concerns as an excuse to target innocent people. And that's where the line becomes very important. Criticizing immigration policy is not automatically xenophobia. Governments everywhere debate border control. But blaming all foreigners for crime, unemployment, or economic struggles becomes dangerous and inaccurate very quickly. Another criticism is that economic problems in South Africa are much bigger than immigration alone. Unemployment, inequality, corruption, load shedding, slow economic growth, skills shortages, these are huge structural issues that existed long before recent immigration debates exploded online. Some economists argue that undocumented migrants are often used as scapegoats for broader governance failures. In other words, instead of fixing corruption, improving education, supporting businesses, or creating jobs, politicians sometimes find it easier to point fingers elsewhere. And here's another uncomfortable reality: many undocumented migrants are vulnerable people trying to survive. Some flee economic collapse. Some flee political instability. Some flee violence. Others simply seek opportunity. Human migration is as old as humanity itself. Think about it. Humans have been moving around since before passports even existed. Ancient humans crossed deserts, mountains, forests, oceans. Meanwhile today someone can't even cross Johannesburg traffic without reconsidering every life decision they've ever made. But seriously, migration is complicated because it involves both law and humanity. Countries have the right to enforce borders, but migrants are still human beings deserving of dignity and basic rights. Another important criticism is that businesses sometimes benefit from undocumented labor. The speaker briefly touched on this too. Some employers hire undocumented workers because they can pay lower wages or avoid regulations. That creates unfair competition and exploitation. So the issue isn't only about migrants. It's also about employers, corruption networks, fake documentation syndicates, and weak enforcement systems. Focusing only on migrants without addressing the broader system oversimplifies the problem. And then there's the political angle. Immigration debates often become emotionally charged during times of economic hardship. When unemployment rises and living costs increase, frustrations naturally grow. Politicians, activists, and media personalities may then frame immigration in ways that attract public attention. Sometimes responsibly. Sometimes irresponsibly. Social media makes this even worse. One viral clip. One emotional speech. One trending hashtag. Suddenly everyone becomes an immigration expert overnight. Your cousin who failed life orientation in high school is suddenly explaining international migration law on Facebook Live like he's addressing the African Union Summit. And that's why nuance matters. The reality is that South Africa faces genuine immigration management challenges. At the same time, migrants are not a single uniform group. Some are highly skilled professionals. Some are refugees. Some own businesses. Some are workers contributing to the economy. Some are undocumented. Some are criminals. Some are victims. Human beings are complicated. What makes this conversation even deeper is the historical context of Southern Africa. Liberation movements across the region supported one another during colonialism and apartheid. Countries hosted exiles, freedom fighters, students, and activists. Those historical relationships still shape expectations and emotions today. That's partly why these debates become so sensitive. Some people feel Southern Africans should support one another because of shared history. Others argue that modern governments still have a responsibility to enforce laws regardless of historical solidarity. And honestly, that tension is not easy to resolve. One of the most important takeaways from the interview is that border management and human rights must both exist together. Strong immigration systems and compassion do not have to be opposites. A country can protect its sovereignty while also respecting human dignity. Those two ideas can coexist. Because if discussions become purely emotional, they create division. But if discussions become purely technical without humanity, they ignore real suffering. The best solutions usually involve multiple things at once: stronger border systems, better regional cooperation, economic growth, anti-corruption measures, legal migration pathways, labor enforcement, and community dialogue. Not slogans. Not panic. Not blame games. Real solutions are harder than shouting at each other online. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson from this entire debate. The interview sparked attention because it touched on real frustrations, real fears, and real historical experiences. But turning those emotions into productive policy discussions requires maturity from everyone: governments, media, activists, and ordinary citizens. At the end of the day, immigration debates are never just about borders. They're about identity, economics, history, opportunity, fear, survival, and the future people imagine for their country. And in South Africa, those conversations are probably going to continue for a very long time. Because if there's one thing South Africans will always do, it's debate passionately. Whether it's football, politics, load-shedding schedules, or immigration policy, nobody can say we don't have opinions. And usually very loud ones.